Ladies and gentlemen, in this Red Gaming Telecom video, we're going to be taking a look at Sapphire's Tri-X R9 290X, which does indeed feature a custom cooler and slightly higher clock speeds than the standard models. And the custom cooler does also bring with it slightly lower temperatures, which is definitely a good thing, and very solid operation. So if you want the full review for this, do go ahead and check out the article that's linked in the video description. We'll also be covering DirectX 12 and Mantle tests, or further Mantle tests versus DirectX 12 in the next few days to a week or so. And in addition to that, we'll also be looking much deeper into overclocking and compute operations. But with that said, let's have a look at some of the game tests themselves. Now, the good news is that in terms of the temperatures, while this card is operating, you're not really going to be seeing the fan budge up about more than 25 to 30%, which at 25%, by the way, is pretty much the standard lowest speed that it operates. And with that 25%, at least in our rigs when we had Battlefield 4, 3D Mark, and so on and so forth running, we did not notice the temperatures go above the mid-60s, which is pretty impressive. So what about the rest of the specifications of the card? Well, it does indeed feature a slight clock speed boost. The standard R9 290X is 1000 MHz. This kicks it up to 1040. Not a massive increase, but it's, hey, free performance. And you've got 5 GHz for the standard R9 290X, and this is 5.2 on a 512-bit memory bus. And that's 4 gigs of RAM, which of course is the standard amount for the 290X series. You're afforded 333 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, which is absolutely crazy. And in terms of power connections, it uses a standard 6 and 8 pin PCIe power adapters, which for any card around this type of level, they're, it's pretty business as usual. Although it does also come with converters if you don't have enough pins on your PSU. Although higher end PSUs, which is probably what you're going to be running this on anyway, you're probably going to be good. So the GPU does support True Audio, FreeSync, and Mantle. True Audio, of course, it reduces the burden on the CPU when audio is being processed. Certain games do support this, including Star Citizen and Thief. And you've got Mantle, which of course is being supported by quite a few games. It's a low-level API and does improve performance quite significantly. Games such as Thief, Battlefield 4, Hardline, Dragon Age Inquisition, and a couple of others are already supporting that, pretty big titles. And of course you've got also FreeSync. FreeSync is AMD's answer to G-Sync. The two technologies work very similarly, at least to the eyes of the gamer, which is the most important thing. The main benefit of AMD's FreeSync is it's generally cheaper because it doesn't require so much proprietary technology that Nvidia's does, which in my opinion does give AMD's technology a slight nod. So our test setup was a default clocked Haswell 4770K. We're running 16 gigs of RAM and an SSD with Windows 8.1 with all of the latest drivers. If you want more information on our test setup, it's in the article. I figure that's a good representation of a lot of gamers' setup. That's why I didn't want to overclock. 95% of people will be running, at least according to the Steam survey right now, 90 to 95% of people run at 1080p. This card, 1080p, not any issue at all. It will rip through 1080p with absolutely no problem. Even running, let's say, Metro Last Light with SSAA at 1080p with all the bells and whistles on, you're still looking at well over 45 frames a second, 46.65 if you want me to be precise. Other games like Bioshock Infinite and Thief are just crazy. So yeah, 1080p, not any problems at all. The card really doesn't start breaking a sweat until you start hitting 1440p, which is basically the same for any higher to, well, let's say any higher range card now on PC, any 250, 300 Great British Pound card, it's 1440p or above. If you're running 1440p, then the card's gonna mostly hit the 60 FPS mark, aside from a few. For example, Metro Last Light at 1440p, which has a higher pixel density, obviously in 1080p it's about 77%, greater pixel density than 1080p. So that with SSAA, you're still hitting, for the most part, 30 FPS VSync, which is not too bad considering the amount of work you're actually asking the GPU to perform. I do want to spend a moment to discuss Mantle. So Mantle tests are pretty impressive, particularly for a few games such as Thief. In our testing, 65 FPS we managed to get an average for with DX11 at 1080p for Thief. On the other hand, 97 for Mantle, which is absolutely massive in terms of performance. And as I said, we're still conducting some Mantle tests, but any Mantle tests we've done, the results are very impressive indeed. So there's a question of like, how important is Mantle with DirectX 12 coming out? Well, Mantle is out now, and there are quite a few games which do support it. And if you're a fan of something like Battlefield Hardline, Battlefield 4, Dragon Age Inquisition, I think it's a nice bonus. I would not say, you know, go ahead and buy a card based on Mantle. I don't think you should buy a card based on any individual piece of technology unless you really heavily need it, which back in the day with G-Sync, it was a really good feather in Nvidia's cap. Fortunately, AMD have managed to counter. It's not good when one company has something so much of an advantage in one particular area, so I'm glad that AMD are countering and releasing a pretty good, or working with partners to release a good selection of monitors. I'll also discuss another little tidbit, and that is downsampling. So I've actually been fairly critical of AMD because they've not supported downsampling until quite recently. Fortunately, it's something they have fixed. So downsampling is the ability to run a monitor's resolution higher than what it would natively support. Your graphics card then downsamples it, it basically scales it, and you get basically better detail. It acts as almost kind of a form of anti-aliasing. You can also combine that with, say, MSAA, or you could be really crazy and downsample from 4K if your GPU supports it down to like whatever resolution, and also run SSAA. But a lot of people like to downsample from, say, 1440p to 1080p, and also enable something like FXAA to help just get rid of the last few jaggers or what have you. So I'm rather happy that they've actually managed to support that, and I think it's definitely an improvement. I've not really got any qualms recommending the 290X. In terms of the marketplace right now, as I'm recording this, which is mid-March 2015, it's slightly cheaper than the GTX 970. So here's how I'm personally viewing this, and how our tests have gone anyway. It's trading blows with the GTX 970, and by which I mean that obviously in Mantle tests it's considerably faster, but that's unfair to really compare. But in other tests, it's about the same as the GTX 970. For example, our Crysis results exactly the same. Our Metro Last Light tests pretty much identical. Tomb Raider results pretty much identical. Bioshock Infinite, the GTX 970 did slightly win out. Thief, obviously, AMD's Mantle pretty much destroyed it, and so on. We have noticed that the Crysis ran a little faster on 1440p, however, it's a slight advantage. Perhaps that could be the 4GB problem that is quite infamous on the GTX 970. But my point being that they're pretty much trading blows. Therefore, it would be logical for me to recommend the card that's slightly cheaper, which currently is the R9 290X. There's also some other benefits, of course. If you're thinking of going for a FreeSync monitor, or you want, you know, a FreeSync or G-Sync technology, then AMD's entry is slightly cheaper, which is obviously a good thing for us as gamers. The main thorn in the R9 290X's side is the 300 series, which is probably going to be out in a few months. We know that the cards are basically ready, and AMD are supposedly holding them back to the last little bits of fine-tuning. But my counter to that is that the cards are probably, I mean, let's assume it's like the 380s and so on. They're probably going to be more expensive than the 290X at launch. And so if you're targeting, let's say, 1080p or 1440p, this card's probably going to be perfect for your budget. I don't really have any qualms recommending it. It's a fantastic GPU for the price. And for those who are interested in possibly handling bit mining or other compute-orientated tasks, let's say you do a lot of video editing like Adobe and so on, it's also quite nice because the GPU performs really well in those types of tests also. So you've got that double benefit. If you are, however, considering running this let's say 1440p or above and you're a stickler, you absolutely must have 60 FPS or higher with everything turned on 1440p. Then none of the cards on this test are going to be able to achieve that in every single game, because quite frankly it's a lot of ask for the price. That said, you could certainly crossfire down the line, and obviously the 290Xs are going to fall in price, particularly when the 300 series cards come out, so that could be another option as well for you to kind of upgrade or get a crossfire set up in the future. And you're probably going to have greater performance than the 300 series, and it might actually end up costing you slightly less. The only problem is you're going to need a fairly beefy PSU, which is obviously something to take into consideration. With that said, hopefully you found the video somewhat informative. Take care. Bye for now.